So let's all take a look at the bookmark that you have that's going to give you some tips about how to read better. You'll notice up at the top that we start with the quote from that poem, Tell Me a Story, because that's what English class is basically about. And then it goes on to say, and I will close read. This is a phrase that I did not make up. This is a phrase that English teachers use all the time as a way of describing the kind of reading that we want you to be able to do as a high school student, as a college student, as an adult. And the first point I want to make is that this is the kind of reading you want to do when you're reading to learn. When you're reading for fun, you do whatever you want. But when you're reading to learn, we want to read closely. We're going to use this process we call close reading. And the goal of close reading is not to memorize what you read. Memorizing and reading are two very different processes. Now, the result of good reading usually includes a decent amount of memory, particularly if you just finished reading it the day before. And many of you may have struggled with remembering things if you read the book at the beginning of the summer. But memorization is not our goal here with close reading. Close reading has to do with comprehending. That's really it, comprehending and appreciating what you read. So I want us to go down this list of things on the bookmark, and all of these things are going to come up when we open up the actual novel in a few minutes. But this is a list of things that a close reader pays attention to. A close reader pays attention to emphasis. If I'm a writer and I really want you to notice something, I'm going to emphasize it somehow so that you don't overlook it. Because think about it. When you read a piece, you're talking about thousands of words and you're not going to remember all of them. So as a writer, I'm going to emphasize the things that I really do want you to pay attention to and remember. And here are some of the ways that a writer might provide emphasis. They might emphasize something with a title. So always pay attention to the title of what you're reading. And then while you're reading, if you see references to the title, you pay attention to that. So the 2 or 3 times in the book To Kill a Mockingbird where they talk about mockingbirds, that's where you pay attention. That's where you start to close read a little bit better. Beginnings are also a good place for emphasis. At the beginning of a story, a storyteller is going to give you the basics that you need for comprehension. So you want to be paying very close attention at the beginning of an article or a story or a poem, because they're going to establish who the characters are, where they are, what time it is, etc. Likewise for the end. The most important final thought or final feeling that an author wants you to have, they're going to put at the very end. So you can rest assured that the end is worth your attention. And then another way of knowing that a writer is trying to emphasize something for you is when they repeat it. If they keep telling you the same thing over and over again, then you know that they want you to notice it. Now, chifforobe came up over and over again, not necessarily because she needed you to learn the word, but because it was a necessary word for describing the events. But a better example of important repetition is something we're going to get to either today or definitely tomorrow. And that's the way Harper Lee keeps talking about the different kinds of knives at the end. She talks about a kitchen knife over and over and over, and she talks about a switchblade a few times. And the number of times she says knife is actually kind of astounding. And so whenever you find that a writer is repeating themselves, that's when you know, okay, this is important. I am going to pay close attention. The next item is word meanings. And as we mentioned already just a little bit when we were going over the quiz, it's not about memorizing new words, although you might end up learning some new words. It's not about vocabulary, it's about comprehension. So anytime you're reading, if there's a word that is getting in the way of you understanding the sentence or the paragraph or the image, then you need to look it up. The next thing is important details, small things that make a difference. This can be challenging because it's hard to know which little things are important and which things aren't. Here's a very generalized example. Let's say I'm writing a story and I give a character a red shirt. In one story, that might be a throwaway detail that you can read, comprehend, move on, and forget. And the next day I say, what color shirt was it? And you don't know. And I say, who cares? But maybe I write another story where the red of that character's shirt has symbolism. And then it would be important. So this is not easy. This is a process. You're going to get better and better as a reader this year. So don't fret too much if your perception of what's important and what's not is a little bit weak right now. You're going to get better at that. And if you are paying attention to the emphasized things, and if you are looking up words as needed, you're going to get better with the details. It's all going to kind of come together. The next thing is imagery. Any story you read is based on imagery. Most poems are chock full of imagery. And a lot of other writing besides, you'll find will be based in imagery. So it says, I'll picture the action like a movie and interpret body language. So as you read a story in particular or a poem, you should be developing a movie in your head. And if the words on the page aren't creating a clear movie in your head, then that's a clue that you need to stop, slow down, maybe ask a question, maybe look up a word. So we keep talking about this chifforobe scene. And if you thought a chifforobe was a judge's gavel, and a lot of people did, so don't feel too bad if that was your wrong answer. And you're trying to picture Mayella asking Tom to come in her house and bust up a chifforobe, and you think a chifforobe is a judge's gavel, your brain should go, oh, that picture doesn't make sense. And that lets you know, I need to look a little closer. So we're going to work on that today too. Inference is that skill we talked about with our questions number 9 and 10 on the quiz, where you had to figure out who owned which knife and who did what. And so if you got any of those wrong, we're going to be clarifying that at some point tomorrow. But that's what an inference is. It's when a writer communicates something to you kind of between the lines, but it's never clearly stated. Now you might be thinking, well, what a pain in the butt is that? Why can't the writer just tell me what happened? And my answer is, when you tell a joke, do you explain the punchline? Of course not, because it would ruin the humor. So try and take my word for it. When a writer doesn't come straight out and tell you something directly, but they give you enough clues to draw an inference, it's for a reason. Maybe it's for a laugh, and it's functioning like a joke. Maybe it's for some other artistic reason, but I promise that there are reasons why writers sometimes don't come straight out and tell you what happened, but they expect you to figure it out. So I'm going to help you figure it out over the next day and a half. The next one is the storyteller's tone. Just like when we talk to each other in regular conversation, we listen to each other's tone of voice. Like if I were to say, come here, I could say, come here, or I could say, come here. There's a different tone, and therefore there's a different meaning. So when you read, you actually want to start getting more and more sensitive to the tone of the words that are on the page, just in the exact same way that we are sensitive to the tone of other human beings when they talk to us in person. And I'll show you some examples of that in just a few minutes. The last one is the storyteller's worldview. the way they look at the world, the things that they believe are important and true, they're going to come out in the writing. So if we're reading To Kill a Mockingbird well, we're going to pick up on her attitude about racism. We're going to pick up on her attitude about reading, about school. And we'll be able to talk more about that another week when we spend some time on the theme. Now, this is not really a checklist. These are just some things for you to begin pondering, and they're going to become clearer as we read together today. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to turn to chapter 28 toward the end. And I'm not sure anybody has this exact copy as me. This is the copy I've had since I was in 9th grade, and that is the truth. So I don't think that anybody has the same copy as me. So I'm not going to be able to give you page numbers. So what I'm going to be looking at right now is I want you to find a paragraph toward the end of chapter 28. It's about a page and a half or 2 pages from the end. And I want you to look for a paragraph that starts with Atticus spoke. Atticus spoke. I'm going to give everybody a moment to find that spot so we can follow along. And actually, I'm going to pause this video for just 1 second and give you guys just a second as well. How can I pause it? I think I only see a stop. All right, maybe I can't. I'm going to run out very, very quickly and get a sip of water so that I can read comfortably for the rest of the period.
This book has terrible language.
All right. Much better. All right, folks, picking up with that paragraph. Just for a little setting, and we won't have time to do much, but I think we can get through about a page today. And then tomorrow we'll come back and pick up wherever we left off and proceed almost to the end of the book together. So what's happening here is it's right after the attack on the kids, and everybody is gathered in Jem's bedroom, and the doctor is there. The doctor has just given him some medicine to make him go to sleep, and the sheriff Hecate is there as well, as well as the Finch family. Atticus spoke. "He can't hear you, Scout. He's out like a light. He was coming around, but Dr. Reynolds put him out again." "Yes, sir." I retreated. Jem's room was large and square. Aunt Alexandra was sitting in a rocking chair by the fireplace. The man who brought Jem in was standing in a corner, leaning against the wall. He was some countryman I did not know. He had probably been at the pageant and was in the vicinity when it happened. He must have heard our screams and come running. But I'm going to pause right there. So if you're paying attention to the imagery, you should have this movie in your head of all these people gathered in the bedroom around a sick kid who's now passed out, and there's a stranger standing in the corner. Now, I also want to point out something about tone. Scout says he probably had been at the pageant, and he must have heard our screams and come running. What do you notice in her tone there? Just those particular words that Harper Lee chooses. Yeah, in the back, whose name I don't know yet.
She seems kind of doubting.
Very good. She's not quite sure. And realizing that Scout's not quite sure is part of our comprehension. She doesn't know who he is, and she's not quite sure even how he got there or why he's there. Atticus was standing by Jem's bed. Mr. Hecate stood in the doorway. His hat was in his hand and a flashlight bulged from his pants pocket. He was in his working clothes. "Come in, Heck," said Atticus. "Did you find anything?" "I can't conceive of anyone low down enough to do a thing like this, but I hope you found him." Mr. Tate sniffed. He glanced sharply at the man in the corner, nodded to him, then looked around the room. Now, if you're getting that movie in your head and you see the sheriff nod at him, what does that indicate? Does Heck know him or not know him? A nod is kind of like a, oh, you, hello. So Heck Tate seems to recognize the stranger in the corner. He looked around the room at Jem, at Aunt Alexandra, then at Atticus. "Sit down, Mr. Finch," he said pleasantly. Atticus said, "Let's all sit down. Have that chair, Heck. I'll go get another one from the living room." Mr. Tate sat in Jem's desk chair. He waited until Atticus returned and settled himself. I wondered why Atticus had not brought a chair for the man in the corner. But Atticus knew the ways of country people far better than I. Some of his rural clients would park their long-eared steeds under the chinaberry trees in the backyard, and Atticus would often keep appointments on the back steps. This one was probably more comfortable where he was. "Mr. Finch," said Mr. Tate, "tell you what I found. I found a little girl's dress. It's out there in my car. That your dress, Scout?" "Yes, sir. If it's a pink one with smocking," I said. Mr. Tate was behaving as if he were on the witness stand. He liked to tell things his own way, untrammeled by state or defense, and sometimes it took him a while. Now, there's a word you might not know, but do you have a feel for the sentence? Untrammeled by state or defense, and sometimes it took him a while. Do you understand the whole sentence? I can't help y'all if you don't tell me whether you're getting it or not. At least nod or shake your head. All right, it's a pretty easy sentence, so I'm not even going to really stop and look that particular word up. It means like unhindered, unstopped. But let's continue. "I found some funny-looking pieces of muddy-colored cloth." "That's my costume, Mr. Tate." So you remember she'd been at the pageant with a costume on. Do you remember what it was? A ham costume, yeah. Mr. Tate ran his hands down his thighs. He rubbed his left arm and investigated Jem's mantelpiece. All right, let's look a little closer at the imagery here. Let that movie play. This body language tells us what about Mr. Tate? He ran his hands down his thighs. He rubbed his left arm and investigated Jem's mantelpiece. Then he seemed to be interested in the fireplace. His fingers sought his long nose. What's the feeling here as you watch this man and his behavior? Yes, Caitlin.
He's uncomfortable.
Good. Exactly. He's uncomfortable because he's getting ready to have to talk about things that he doesn't want to talk about. Excellent. This is what a close reader does. A close reader watches the movie in their imagination and they interpret it just like you do in real life. "What is it, Heck?" said Atticus. Mr. Tate found his neck and rubbed it. "Bob Yule's lying on the ground under that tree down yonder with the kitchen knife stuck up under his ribs. He's dead, Mr. Finch." And that's where we will end today. Tomorrow we'll pick up in chapter 29, so don't forget your books. And I do want to point out that this is the first appearance of a knife. What kind of knife killed him? That's important. And I will see you tomorrow.
Make sure the door and